I uncovered a terrifying family secret: why the rich heiress lived in a haunted shack. I never should have opened that door. My gut twisted the moment I felt the cold, jagged wood beneath my fingertips. It was a normal Tuesday, the kind of day where nothing unexpected happens until it did. I was just another poor soul caught in the web of mundane life, drifting through my job at the diner, serving soggy fries to bored customers. Then I heard the whispers. Soft at first, like leaves rustling in the wind, pulling me toward that rickety old shack at the end of Maple Street. The shack loomed in the fading light, wrapped in a cloak of shadows. I could smell the decay, a heavy, damp odor hanging in the air like a funeral shroud. A chill ran down my spine. What was I doing? My heart pounded as I stepped closer. I felt an invisible force urging me, a mix of dread and curiosity. Hadn't that heiress gone missing years ago? The stories whispered about her like the wind through the trees. They said she vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a ghostly trail, a fortune, and an ancient curse. That I pushed the door open a crack. It creaked, a mournful sound that echoed in the quiet. Inside, the darkness pressed against me. Shadows danced, flickering in the corners of my vision. A chill skated across my skin, and I clasped my hands to keep them from trembling. My breath fogged in front of me, mingling with the stale scent of mold and dust. Then I heard a soft thud like something shifting in the depths. Panic clawed at my throat. I should turn back. I should run. But my feet were glued to the floor, curiosity pinning me down. What if she was here, the heiress? What if she had hidden something? I felt like a moth drawn to a flame. Another thud, louder this time, rattled the floorboards. My heart raced, pounding like a war drum in my chest. I wasn't alone. Someone or something was in the shack with me. The sound echoed into silence, and then whispers. I strained to listen, but I couldn't make them out. Just a chorus growing louder, a chant of voices from the shadows. Suddenly, something moved in the corner of my eye. I whipped around, panic rising in my throat. The darkness shifted. No. I couldn't faint. I had to breathe. I took a shaky step back, and the ancient door slammed shut behind me, locking me in. My skin prickled, and I felt a presence brush past me. I wasn't dreaming, this was all too real. My chest tightened. Then I saw a vague figure standing just beyond the edge of the dim light. My mouth went dry. And then the scream erupted from my throat. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The scream echoed off the walls, a sound swallowed by the oppressive darkness, only for the air to fill with silence that felt more alive than the sound it replaced. I staggered back, every instinct screaming at me to flee, but the door that had so violently slammed shut felt like a binding chain across my fate. My breath came in shallow gasps, my thoughts spinning wildly, grappling with the presence lurking just outside the reach of light. Who's there? I managed to choke out, my voice cracking under the weight of fear. I strained to see, but the figure remained shrouded, a distorted shadow flickering at the edge of my vision. It felt as if it were feeding off my terror, drawing closer as I trembled, trapped in the delusion that this was simply my imagination running rampant. Then, in that suffocating pitch, a voice floated toward me, cold and clear, as if carved from ice. You should not have come here. The words scraped against my skin like shards of glass, each syllable churning up the rancid memories of cautionary tales told by locals. They all warned against venturing too close to the heiress' grave, especially one that was said to be hidden in these very walls. The figure shifted, stepping into the faint light cast by the moon filtering through grimy windows, and my heart dropped. It was a woman, her eyes hollow pits of darkness, her pale skin glowing unearthly in the dim. An ethereal glow surrounded her, and her long, tangled hair drifted as if submerged in water. And oh no, my mind raced through the stories, the sightings of the heiress ghost, rumored to walk the earth searching for something lost or perhaps something she had taken. This wasn't happening. "Help me," she whispered, a sound that didn't echo in the room but instead wrapped around me, pulling me deeper into her despair. "They won't let me go." Something tugged at me. Was this supposed to be compassion I felt, or was it the seduction of buried secrets? Behind her, more shadows shifted, creeping out from the edges of the room like fog curling around cold stone. Suddenly, it wasn't just her presence I felt but a collective weight pressing in, spirits long trapped in this forgotten place, their murmurs reverberating from the walls like trapped echoes of despair. The shack itself seemed to respond, the floor creaked underfoot, a low, mournful groan beneath my weight, as if the very structure was alive and aware. I could almost see them forming behind her twisting figures, their faces blurred in anguish, mouths opening in soundless screams. "No," I whispered, shaking my head, trying to ward off whatever spell was being cast over me. I backed away, stumbling into the door I had prayed could break me free, but it felt icy against my touch. It was no longer the escape I craved. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony demanding to be heard, drowning out the otherworldly call of the heiress. "You have to help us." They echoed through me, igniting memories of every wretched tale, from vengeful spirits to hearts forever lost, compelling me, enticing me. The heiress extended a hand, her eyes glimmering with ancient sorrow. "You're like me," she murmured, and the shadows twitched in acknowledgement. "You will remember." My mind swirled, panic and desperation merging into a terrifying realization I had become part of this morbid puzzle. I blinked, trying to shake the fog off my thoughts, yet the presence before me began to twist and stretch, contorting into shapes I never wanted to see. The shadows rippled like a dark tide, overwhelming and insurmountable. What lay behind that deceptive calm? What darkness was waiting to unfold? I turned to run, but the door burst open. There stood a tall figure, indistinct but imposing, the light spilling behind them like an ominous halo. "You should have heeded the warnings," they warned, voice deep and resonating with the authority of someone who had seen countless souls slip into the void. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, but all I could hear were the whispers. They grew louder, thrumming through my bones. And then the floor beneath me shuddered a deep, rumbling growl that came from the very bowels of the earth. I knew then there would be no escape. A chilling laugh echoed from the shadows, and in that moment, the reality of everything I knew began to unravel. My vision darkened, the shack pulsating with an insatiable hunger, the walls closing in, and I screamed again as I was consumed by the shadows, knowing far too late that curiosity had tethered my soul to a fate I couldn't fathom. As the darkness engulfed me, a last gasp of clarity rushed into my mind. Had I truly come to uncover secrets, or had I merely sought to join the company of the damned? The shack trembled, the haunting voices faded into a dreadful chant. And just before the world succumbed to blackness, a single phrase cut through: "They'll never let you go." I was awash in shadows, my senses fraying under the weight of despair as the walls of the shack moaned and shivered. The cold seeped into my bones, twisting around my heart, squeezing tighter with every whispered word, every mournful echo of lost souls. The chilling laughter reverberated through the air, bouncing off the ancient beams, a mockery of my flight before the looming shadows. Suddenly, the floor buckled beneath me, throwing me to my knees. I braced myself against the ground, gasping for breath, desperately clawing for some semblance of stability. The chains of cold dampness tightened around my wrist, leaving me feeling ensnared. As I glanced upward, the shadows had begun to shift again, coiling around the specter of the heiress, entangling her in their dark embrace. "Join us," she whispered, her voice now layered, drenched with numerous grievances, as if the shadows spoke through her. "Don't fight it." I shook my head vehemently, trying to drown out the creeping dread that crawled up my spine. But the shadows grew insistent, closing in with piercing whispers that roared like distant thunder, the unmistakable echo of souls long forgotten. My heart thundered in tandem, beating wildly against the walls of the shack, as if it were trying to escape my chest. "Leave! I must leave!" I yelled, but my voice seemed to disintegrate, lost among the teeming spirits that had bound themselves to this cursed place. I pushed myself upright, brushing against the damp walls, only for the surface to writhe beneath my fingers. I recoiled as decayed faces pressed against the wood, their mouths moving wordlessly, their hollow gazes filled with utter despair. Just then, an acrid odor invaded my senses, potent and nauseating, like a rotting harvest. Instinctively, I turned toward the door, but the tall figure that had loomed there now stood at my side, a dark silhouette against a backdrop of chasing shadows. Their presence rendered the room colder, an ominous dread seeping into my mind that there were ties binding me to this realm beyond mere curiosity. "You seek to leave, but the shack remembers," they intoned, their voice rich with the weight of foreboding. "It will not allow it. A debt must be paid." "What do you mean?" I protested, my thoughts swirling, tangled around the skeletal fingers of despair. The heiress was not the first to seek resolution, her bloodline is a stain on this land. The figure's voice twisted into something grotesque, an amalgamation of whispers and snarls. "You will uncover the truth behind their hunger." The shadows pulsated, lurching forward with a feral intensity, as if alive and waiting to claim me. Panic coursed through me, and without logic or reason, I darted toward the window. With an almost primal urgency, I grabbed the jagged rim, my fingertips scraping against the rust-laden glass, determined to crack through, to flee into the night and leave this wretched place behind, but a suffocating force pushed back, heavier than the mist that loomed outside. "You belong to the shack now in ways you do not yet see," the voice murmured, and I felt chains imaginative, real coiling at my feet, dragging me back toward the core of darkness. Choking, I wrenched myself from the window, turning back to the room, face to face with the heiress once again. Her visage had morphed, twisted into something amazed, hungry, perhaps. "It's in your blood," she breathed, her sadness laced with an eerie exhilaration. "Help me find him, or suffer like the others." I staggered back, confused. "Who?" My voice trembled, a minuscule flicker of defiance amid mounting terror. "Your ancestor hid treasures beyond riches." A smile unfurled on her lips, sharp like a predator's, igniting a fire in her hollow eyes. "And the living cannot escape without discovering the truth." Elongated shadows writhed and stretched behind her, framing her as a queen of nightmares, her past and the anguish of so many lost souls swirling around her like dark petals in an unforgiving storm. In that moment, with my heart racing against time, I fathomed the depth of peril I was in, a bait dangling before hungry eyes, a trap set long before my arrival. Before I could fully comprehend my fate, shadows erupted from the floorboards, snaking toward me in dozens of spindly fingers, desperate to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. And as they touched my skin, icy tendrils burrowing into my soul, the cacophony of whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, laced with terror and longing. Do not. I screamed, my voice drowned in the reverberating squall of anguish. Then, through the clamor, I glimpsed a flash of motion, a glinting object barely visible in the shadows. My breath came quick as I realized it was a key, heavy and ornate, glimmering ominously in the darkness. As I reached out for it, a screamy scream pierced the haze, now twisted into a harmony sung by the shack itself. That I was running out of time. I could either seize the key, risking my soul in the process, or surrender to a fate entwined with those already lost within this cursed trap. The decision loomed ominously before me, and as I drew closer, the tortured wails rose once more, beckoning me into the depths of my family's horrific legacy. And then, the ground beneath me roared to life, threatening to swallow me whole. The darkness convulsed around me, shifting as if the very fabric of the shack quivered in anticipation. I could feel the weight of the air thickening, pressing down on my chest, suffocating me with a malevolent hunger that seemed intent on consuming my resolve. As I lunged for the key, the floor beneath me groaned with unnatural might, the wood boards warping and splitting in twisted designs that mirrored the torment etched in the faces that huddled behind them. Fingers cold, clammy wrapped around my wrist, but I shook them off as if they were mere wisps of smoke. The very air was charged with a desperate energy as I wrestled against the shadows. "No!" I screamed, feeling a voice far beyond my own emerge, echoes reverberating around the room like a mad symphony of grief. Grappling with my own fears, I did not dare glance back at the heiress. I focused solely on the key, its ornate form glinting desperately as I extended my trembling fingers. I could almost hear the whispers of my ancestors urging me on, dripping with tantalizing secrets hidden away for far too long. "This is your birthright," they seemed to say, poverty starkly contrasting with the gleaming metal. As my fingers brushed the key's cold surface, a deafening roar exploded from the very heart of the shack, trembling the walls as though they were alive, awakened from deep slumber. The shadows darted back, momentarily stunned, and I managed to grasp the key, its cold weight against my palm fierce and grounding, but victory was fleeting. The shack quaked violently beneath me, and the shadows lunged back, clawing at my clothes, trying to rend me from the light. The heiress' face twisted into an expression of fury. "You have claimed what is not yours," she shrieked, the wailing of countless souls weaving into her voice, creating a tapestry of horror that snaked through the damp air, urging me to flee. "You don't know what you've done," the figure beside her hissed, becoming ever more oppressive. "The moment you touch the key, you bind your fate to theirs. The shack demands a sacrifice." Then, all at once, their voices blended into a dark crescendo that tore at the edges of reality, spilling forth like broken glass. As the shadows enveloped me, I felt the key pulse against my chest like a vivified heartbeat, a tainted rhythm echoing the absolute desolation swirling through the room. Panic seized me. I tried to sprint for the door, but the floor beneath my feet collapsed, revealing an abyss yawning within a dark portal pulling at my mind and soul. Before I could scream, a vision rushed through my thoughts. I was a child again, standing before the cracked mirror of my grandmother's attic, witnessing whispers of my past unfolding, lavish carriages and glittering balls, yet mingled in the glimmer were faces deformed by despair, specters of those who had come before me, the sleepers cursed to roam. I gasped, recognizing the undercurrent of greed that had twisted my family's fortunes into twisted tales of woe. A snare of desperation snatched hold of my throat, reverberating through my bones as I was gripped with the knowledge of a truth, unrelenting and terrible. The key wasn't just a means of escape, it was a tether, binding me to all of this. The ancestors watching, their ethereal faces twisted in part agony and part relief, beckoned me forward farther down the corridor of history stretching infinitely dark before me and through them. I screamed again, barely aware of my own voice rising over the chains of sorrow. "What do I have to lose?" But the words were mere sparks against the consuming void. Suddenly, the shadows surged forward, dragging me toward the broken floor. The yawning darkness below licked hungrily at my feet like icy flames. I clutched the key, its jagged edge cutting into my trembling palm, blood welling up to mingle with shadows that leapt and danced in delight. Then came a cry, a different one, piercing the din, a child's lamentation, filled with despair and loss. The dark portal before me writhed, revealing glimpses of the past. "Please," the voice begged, a heart-wrenching plea, echoing from the depths. "Save me." I staggered, overwhelmed, torn between the innocence of that pleading voice and the malevolent shadows gnashing at the edges of my spirit. The further I leaned into that dark portal, the more I felt the weight of my family's sins pressing against me, molding into a terrifying awareness that this wasn't simply about escape, it was a reckoning, for that child was no stranger. He was part of the lineage I hadn't yet seen, a hidden victim buried in blood and betrayal. That child was me, orphaned not in body but in spirit. In an instant, I was blinded by fear and rage. I could either save myself or plunge deeper into the shadows, but could that be enough? As the shadows surged, the ground trembled again, opening wider to swallow me whole. With a fierce cry, I reached into the darkness, the key clutched tight in my fist, knowing I would either find salvation or be consumed by the oppressive past. Then, everything went still. The needling shadows suspended in awe seemed to hold their breath, waiting for my next move, fixated on the single moment that would determine the fate of generations. My heart beat like a war drum in my chest, waiting for the inevitable, the endless cliff where choice met consequence. And before the darkness could claim me again, I plunged into the unknown, ready to confront the horrors that awaited me. The darkness engulfed me, blinding and thick, as I hurtled through a void that vibrated with the echo of generations past. The cold grasp of the shadows clawed at my body, seeking to pull me into their depths, but the key burned fiercely against my chest, an anchor tethering me to the surface of reality. A rush of images assaulted my mind, flickering fragments of lives lived among opulence and shadows. Faces flickered in and out of existence, their gaunt eyes hollow yet pleading, etched with longing and despair. They reached out, their fingers stretching through the veil of darkness, mere silhouettes of a life I had never known yet was intrinsically a part of. Time overlaid itself like a cursed tapestry, unraveling everything I thought was real. There were parties drenched in laughter and gold, yet every dance floor concealed a child's panic beneath it all. The more I delved, the clearer I understood, these were my ancestors, trapped in a cycle, ensnared by their gluttony, and their unwitting successor. They were doomed to linger here in anguish, feeding the shadows that thrived on their regrets. Suddenly, the ethereal landscape morphed into a squalid room, the sound of wooden creaks and cries of anguish piercing through the facade. The surface of a cracked mirror materialized before me once again. I was drawn into it, my own reflection twisted in grotesque horror. Blood ran down my cheeks, mingling with tears that had fallen across the ages. "Help us!" A chorus of voices pleaded from behind the glass, their desperation suffusing my veins with fear. "You must end the cycle." Their faces morphed from that of my ancestors to the inner child I glimpsed earlier, his face streaked with dirt and tears. Me face, once innocent, now drenched in the legacy of betrayal. As the realization struck, the shadows writhed, swirling around me with a menacing hunger like wolves sensing a wound. They whispered my name, a tantalizing chant that wrapped around my senses, thick and intoxicating. Join us, escape is not for the wicked." I stumbled back, heart racing, vision blurring as their voices throbbed in my mind. "Who are you?" I managed to utter, certainty slipping away like sand through my fingers. Without warning, the mirror shattered, the shards transforming into jagged edges of darkness that pierced into my very soul. A figure emerged from the gaping void, a woman cloaked in shadows and woven from the fabric of nightmares. Her face bore an unsettling resemblance to the heiress, yet it was marred by sorrow and vengeance. "Mother," she whispered, her voice enveloping me like a chilling mist. "You've come to claim the legacy of the cursed." Recognition washed over me, dread curling my fingers around the key. I half expected the confrontation would draw blood, yet her intensity unnerved me, reaching under my skin. "No, I'm here to break the cycle," I shouted, defiance ringing hollow in the haunted space. Her laughter echoed, a broken sound that reverberated through the darkness. "Another fool spouting empty promises. Can you truly escape what you are?" The shadows flickered ominously, mocking the resolve I clung to. Suddenly, an agonizing scream erupted from the pounding chaos of memories, and a wall of ice-white light erupted behind her, illuminating the depths of despair I tried so desperately to outrun. Within its luminance, hundreds of faces emerged, each locked in an eternal struggle for peace, parents pulling children back as they reached towards the light, frantic, desperate. "No!" I cried out, realizing the truth that sat heavy within me. Each face was another victim of our family's greed, lost in the very legacy I sought to escape. Their futures irrevocably intertwined with my own. But as the light beckoned, the shadows roared back into action, expanding and pulsating violently. "You cannot unbind yourself, child of the cursed." The figure screeched, the air thickening with impending doom as the shadows lashed out wildly. "Your blood is ours." They hissed in unison, and I felt myself being drawn back towards the depths of despair, the key desperately pressing against my chest, as if warning me of the choice I had to make. Then, with a crack like a thunderstorm, the walls of the shack trembled. Items scattered to the ground, furniture overturned, and the very earth seemed to quake beneath me. I was no longer just fighting for my own escape, the shack around me was awakening, unearthing ancient grievances it had long kept hidden, clawing at the ties binding all its lost souls. As the shadows closed in, I faced the glimmering light, the faces reaching out, their desperate cries merging into an unending symphony of despair and hope. And, in the tumult of choice, the key in my hand felt heavier than ever before. It was not simply an escape route but a final chance for redemption. The dark woman lunged forward, her eyes aflame with hatred, ready to claim me for her own. "You will not escape!" she shrieked, just as the mirror shattered completely, cascading into a million points of darkness, and in that moment, my heart seized with dread as an unfamiliar voice whispered from the shadows, "But what if you must sacrifice someone else to save yourself?" I gasped, the full weight of my family's sins crashing down like a tidal wave, and as I prepared to make the most irrevocable choice of my life, my vision blurred. The embers of the past surged around me, the arms of the damned waiting eagerly underneath the soil of despair, and then came the chilling realization: I had opened a door that would rewrite not only my fate but the legacy of countless souls entwined with mine. As the ground splintered beneath my feet, I screeched, suspended in a purgatory of despair and hunger, and with the shadows advancing, I knew the final reckoning awaited, anxiously clawing its way to the surface. The air thickened, suffocating amidst the chaos, as the ground gave a violent heave. I tumbled to the floor, the oppressive force of the shadows bearing down on me like a suffocating blanket. The ancient shack moaned in protest as it was torn apart by unseen forces. Splinters and dust swirled around me, the remnants of tortured spirits flooding the space in a riot of sorrow. Among the cacophony of fear-stricken cries, I found clarity in my panic. The choice before me had suddenly morphed into something darker, crueler. Beneath the anguished faces clawing for freedom lay whispers of revenge, buried deep within the walls. It seemed every life I uncovered was just another echo of the decisions I was destined to repeat. This horrible legacy was calling. I could feel it in the marrow of my bones. "Make your choice." The woman's voice loomed, her figure flickering erratically against the swirling chaos. "Your blood is an offering, your heritage, a burden. Feed us. Feed us with the despair of the unsuspecting, and we shall let you live." Her words struck me like a dagger, twisting deep into the tender places of my soul. Above all, the vivid faces of my ancestors loomed, each one a silent testament to the consequences of their greed, anchoring them willingly to the regrets of greed and lust. I had never asked for any of this, and yet, the truth whispered to me, it was my right, my duty to continue the cycle. The thought clashed violently against my desire to be free, and I could only scream as a torrential swell of souls surged forward, faces pale and features twisted with an agonizing desire for release. Their cries morphed into a sinister chant as they began a cruel litany, summoning the dark desire deep within me. In the heart of the spiraling shadows, I spotted movement. A figure emerged, shrouded in the Hosea boy, no older than 12, his eyes wide with fear and recognition. Beneath the dirt and bruises, he bore an uncanny resemblance to the child I had fleetingly glimpsed in my visions. My heart lurched. He was a version of me bound to the shack, trapped by the same curse I fought against. "No!" The scream erupted from my lips, a raw and primal sound as I stole a step back, horrified. "You can't have him," the woman laughed, bitter and cold, savoring my fear. "You know the price. The only way to save yourself is to sacrifice what you love. He is part of you, and he will continue the cycle." A gut-wrenching swell of despair enveloped me. I came to understand that this boy represented my own lost innocence, the child I had abandoned, tethered to the tragedies of this shack. If I truly wished to escape, would have to betray my very self, embrace the horror and seal the fates of generations. No. I screamed again, but the spell of the shack reverberated through my veins, seducing me with visions of power and wealth. "You can't do this." The boy stumbled back, his features twisting into a mask of terror and accusation. "You're abandoning me. You're just like them," he cried, his voice shaking as he reached out, desperate for rescue. The shack trembled further, and the shadows roared in approval, emboldened by the scent of chaos. Hungry for the essence of my lineage, driven by instinct, I charged forward, reaching for the boy. "We can break this together. We can fight them." The shadows hissed in fury, a visceral warning, and I stumbled as they snaked through the air, wrapping around my limbs like serpents. The ground beneath us fractured, jagged cracks splintering as the demonic power grew. But as I reached for him, the weight of the key burned unbearably against my skin. It was screaming for release, demanding I unlock whatever lay ahead, yet the terror coursing through me screamed louder. In one electrifying moment, everything blurred, visions of past lives and tragedies merged with the present, flooding my senses, a kaleidoscope of narratives that cycled endlessly in an echo of despair. The boy's voice pleaded, drowning in the vortex of screams. "Am not your sacrifice. Am not just a tool for your escape." Even in his anguish, I recognized the glimmer of hope that flickered in his small form. Desperation charged through my veins. It was no longer just sacrifice for safety. This was survival against the tide of familial greed. I couldn't let the cycle continue. I wouldn't allow it to claim another innocent. A sickening dread unfurled as my heart raced in primal resistance to my fate, and the restless phantoms wove a path toward my family's darkest secret. The very key that bound us all was a curse masked as a blessing. "It'll save you," I screamed, thrusting the key into the air even as darkness swarmed at the edges of my thoughts, a cacophony of noise threatening to drown out everything. The spectral figures surged upon me, the whispers now articulate growls. "Claim your birthright or watch him die," and then, with a blinding flash, the shack erupted in a storm of light, claws of shadow pulling hard against my resolve. I felt the boy's fingers slip from my grasp, and I turned just in time to see him engulfed by the very darkness I fought against. A wave of horror flooded over me as I realized that his fate as well as mine was sealed in that screeching void, now alive with the resurrection of our family's darkest past. In that split second, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The choice hung there in the air like a pendulum, deadly and decisive. As the shadows roared and the boy vanished completely, a single realization set in: I would have to do the unthinkable to reclaim our destinies and shatter the curse that bound us. And then came the voice again, clearer now than ever. "You want to escape, child? Sacrifice him, or embrace your fate." Terror enveloped me. They were the last words I'd hear before crossing the precipice, and the world glimmered brightly before plunging into the deepest shadows. The light and dark collided in a spiraling tempest as I stood at the edge of oblivion, unprepared for the price that awaited me. I took a trembling breath, and as I prepared to step into the unknown, the final threads of my lineage whispered through the oppressive darkness: "The choice is yours." But within the silence that followed lay the most horrible truth of all: they weren't leaving my decision up to fate, they were guiding me toward an unspeakable horror, one the shack would weave through every thread of anguish yet to come. The winds howled outside, a symphony of sorrow, mingling with the oppressive darkness like ghosts wailing their eternal lament. I remained frozen at the threshold of the unknown, my heart thundering in my chest, engulfed in a fog of despair. My senses were a tempest of dread, knowing the power of the decision I faced. If I stepped forward into the dark, I would not only be losing the boy, but I would be absorbing centuries of anguish into my very being, a sacrificial offering sewn into the fabric of my lineage. Suddenly, the air crackled, the shadows around me shifting restlessly, as the walls of the shack throbbed and creaked like a living entity. They thrummed with pent-up energy released from the void where the boy had vanished. With each breath I took, I felt the weight of 1,000 souls pressing against my chest. Their anguish was alive, a pulsating force demanding a reckoning. "Join us," they called, voices screaming from all around, disembodied and filled with agony. "We are your legacy." Their cries were haunting echoes of every ancestor that had walked before me, a lineage soaked in blood and betrayal. I could see their twisted faces in the dimness, their mouths moving in sync with the wind's mournful song, whispering secrets of the shack that even I had not yet uncovered. With every moment, it felt as if the walls were narrowing, squeezing out hope while gnawing at the fabric of my sanity. In a desperate bid to break free from their clutches, I summoned the courage to wrench my gaze from the swirling darkness and face the ground. Beneath my feet, I could feel a pulsation, a rhythm discreet yet relentless, as if the earth was alive with secrets I was too terrified to unearth. I dropped to my knees, and without fully grasping why, I began to dig through the dirt, clawing desperately at the soil, my fingers trembling both with fear and determination. The ground was unyielding, yet each handful unearthed fragments of history, pieces of pottery, shards of glass, remnants of lives long extinguished. And then I struck something solid, something that hummed with a resonance that vibrated through my bones. The flashlight I clutched flickered as I brushed away the dirt, revealing a small, intricately carved box, its surface etched with the same symbols that adorned the key thrust into my palm. My heart raced as I pried open the box, a sense of foreboding curling in my gut. Inside lay a withered book, pages yellowed and fragile, its spine cracked from centuries of neglect. Yet it wasn't the book itself that silenced my breath, it was the title etched in elaborate gold leaf, The Circle of Blood. The moment I touched it, the temperature of the air plummeted, and a chill crawled up my spine. A gust of wind exploded through the shack, whipping my hair around my face like fingers grasping at my thoughts. Shadows elongated, twisting towards me as if drawn by a magnet, hungry for my realization. As I opened the book, the ancient pages unfurled like wings, revealing lines of grotesque illustrations and meticulously detailed histories, images of ceremonies long forgotten, where the rich had feasted on the sacrifices of the lesser. My soul quailed at the horrors documented within, desperate cries echoing in my mind as the artwork transformed into vibrant real-life memories, alive and vivid, birthed from the torment of the shack's generations. Stilling my breath, I stumbled upon a section just past the grotesque rites. This one spoke directly of the very curse that bound my bloodline. It told of a pact made by my ancestors with unspeakable entities that roamed between worlds, a covenant of greed that promised untold wealth and fortune, but demanded a price. A child of each generation would eventually be claimed by darkness when the cycle continued. My pulse quickened as realization surged like pulsing electricity. I had fated that boy to become my sacrifice. I wasn't merely a bystander in this horrific legacy, I was an architect, a willing participant in this unending narrative of grief. Awaken the bond. The voices wailed from the depths of the shack, their cries mingling with whispers rising from the book. Awaken. Feed the shadows or your blood shall run black. The words tumbled heavier than lead, and I knelt there, the ancient text clutched in trembling hands, weighing my options against a backdrop of wailing specters. I had uncovered a piece of the truth, yet the horror before me loomed larger than any consequence I could foresee. The desire to flee from this cursed place battled fiercely against the sickened allure of its power. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed outside, ripping through the hypnotic murmur surrounding me. I bolted to my feet, breath hitching in my throat. The scream belonged to a woman, a voice I barely recognized from my dreams but felt tethered to in a way that twisted my gut with fear. Ignoring the weight of the book, I dashed to the window, heart racing. Outside, a swirling mist billowed and twisted in unnatural patterns, beyond which lay the silhouette of a woman, a figure of shadows that seemed both familiar and foreboding. Her back was turned, but even from this distance, I felt a horrific connection grow, a sickening pull that reverberated in the marrow of my bones. Don't look away. The spirits shrieked in an eerie cacophony, rising from the ground as they abandoned their whispers and coiled around me like smoke. You must choose. The woman turned suddenly, and just as clarity struck, I recognized her face, twisted in anguish. Me mother, a fractured specter of the past, her eyes glinting with an unspeakable horror. The shadows roared at the sight of her, swelling with ecstatic anticipation. Help me! She cried, her voice splintering through the haze. The choice must be made. Now. In that heart-stopping moment, time collapsed as the shack around me intensified, a resounding pulse echoing the heartbeat of generations lost to darkness. The decision loomed larger than life, an anguished symphony of despair and clashing desires erupting in a grotesque tapestry of visions. As the window shattered with a ferocious gust, I felt the earth tremble beneath me, echoing the haunting words of the shack, claim your birthright or succor your past. But as the shadows surged, twisting towards me, the ultimate truth struck harder than any blow. I hadn't merely unearthed the family secret, I had awakened something far worse, something that would stop at nothing to complete its malevolent cycle. Then, as the mist began to swirl and engulf my mother's fading form, I realized with dread that I was no longer just a player in this cursed legacy. I was the linchpin, and what I would choose next might doom us all to a horror far worse than I could comprehend. Because somewhere deep within the glow of that cursed shack, more than just history awaited an entity eager to quench its insatiable thirst for chaos and power, and I was its next vessel. I backed away from the shattering window, heart pounding in my chest as the sinister shadows closed in around me. The air thickened, heavy with despair and ancient malice as the cries of the damned intensified, drowning out my thoughts. My mother's facia visage twisted by fear and desperation hovered before me, both a reminder of my family's tragic history and a warning I couldn't ignore. "Join us." The wails grew louder, echoing through the shack and vibrating in my bones. "Embrace your destiny." I hurled the book away from me, but it landed ensconced in the shadows as if embraced by some dark force, its pages fluttering fervently in the wind. The whispers escalated, a feverish chant growing in intensity, and I feared that the shack itself was rejoicing at my turmoil. The mist that cloaked my mother throbbed and twisted violently, shifting in unnatural patterns that felt alive, writhing and pulsating as if hungry for something more substantial than just despair. A shudder ran down my spine as I recalled my childhood stories, woven from cautionary tales told to me by a mother desperate to shield her daughter from the shack's horrors. "Stay away from the shack at night," she had warned, her voice trembling with an unshakable conviction. "It steals souls." And here I was, standing in the twilight between realities, at the precipice of the very doom she had warned me against. Staring into the abyss of my own making, I began to understand that the bonds of legacy were forged not only from blood but also from the choices each generation made. Save her. The cacophony of spirits shrieked, a tempest fueled by unchecked fury. Claim your birthright. I didn't want a birthright forged in blood and shadows. I wanted to shatter the cycle and rescue my mother from its grasp. Desperation pushed me into action. I stumbled toward the splintered window, the echoes of my ancestors urging me forward, but the tumult of the storm outside held me captive. The last remnants of my mother's figure flickered like an ancient film reel, her eyes a deep well of sorrow. "You must decide, my love," she whispered, sorrow and resolve mingling in her voice. "Do not let them take me. Save the boy. Save us both." But before I could respond, an overwhelming dread ripped through me, and I felt the shadows shift into a cohesive mass, a dark tide surging toward me. An otherworldly presence seeped into my thoughts, filling them with anguish and desire, whispering promises of power, wealth, and dominion over the past. The walls of the shack thrummed violently as the temperature plummeted further, and suddenly I was surrounded by faces, spectral figures reaching out, their limbs twisted and contorted, mouths opening wide to swallow my sanity. Their eyes were hollow, devoid of light, yet filled with an insatiable hunger. Then, from the viscous shadows, a whisper reached my ears, a single voice rising above the cacophony, its tone soothing and luring. "You wield the key to your salvation." It was deep and sonorous, sending a shiver through my entire body. "What is your choice?" Panicking, I searched frantically for a way out, but the shadows pulsed with heightened fervor, wrapping around my legs, pulling me towards the ground. The grip tightened slowly, reminiscent of a mother cradling her child, the contrast of love and terror merging seamlessly. Suddenly, the shack illuminated with a sickly glow that pulsed ominously, revealing the book glowing like a beacon of power behind me. In that moment, clarity struck. I could harness the knowledge held within it, a key to unraveling the curse that bound my family for generations. With trembling hands, I reached for the book amidst the chaos, vowing my intent. No more. I refuse to let this cycle of sacrifice continue. It'll break your hold. But before my fingers could touch its leather cover, every spirit erupted into a thunderous roar, a surge of anguish colliding against my plea. The shack trembled beneath me as waves of darkness engulfed the room, the air crackled with tension, the very essence of despair coalescing into the very heart of the shadows. I felt as if I were being consumed, my thoughts being plucked away like leaves from a dying tree. No. I screamed, fingers brushing the book's edges, desperation fueling my movements. "I will not be afraid." And as I finally clasped the book and the shadows recoiled, the seismic rumble of ancient forces rattled the world around me. The glowing light of the book pierced through the darkness, illuminating my mother's spectral form for one fleeting moment. Her anguished expression now morphed into something resembling hope, then everything shattered, the shack crumbling as the overpowering shadows lunged at me. The book glowed brilliant white and erupted in a flash, the air heavy with acrid smoke and an overpowering scent of decay. In the chaos, a final surge of sound, a howl from beyond the veil, crescendoed into piercing silence as I was plunged into darkness. And the last thing I felt was the cold grip of the shadows pulling me into their depths, the air around me thickening into a chilling whisper, "Your choice has been made, dear one." As darkness swallowed me whole, the vision of the boy, the sacrifice, and the shack blurred, leaving me with one horrifying realization: the true horror was just beginning, and the shack was but a portal waiting to unleash its fury upon the world. Fingers of darkness clenched around me like a vice, squeezing the breath from my lungs while stealing away the warmth of my humanity. I couldn't tell if I was falling or floating, but the sensation twisted in my gut like a serpent coiling tighter, forcing me deeper into the abyss that I am, that suffocating void. Memories flickered like dying embers, the shack, the faces of tormented souls, my mother's voice echoing in my mind. And that voice, that haunting cry for help, tethered me to the realm above: "You must decide." Each word reverberated painfully inside my skull, a dreadful reminder of the choice I had made even as my reality was unraveling. Abruptly, the shadows released their grip, and I fell not to the ground but into an endless expanse of swirling mist. I landed with a jarring thud, the cold biting into my skin as if the very ground resented my presence. I pushed myself to my feet, heart racing, breath visible in the fog that swallowed whole any remnants of light. "Welcome, seeker of truth," a smooth voice slithered through the air like velvet. "You have walked into the realm of those who were lost." Before me, vague forms materialized in the swirling mist, grotesque silhouettes wrought from sorrow and anguish. Hollow eyes stared back at me, a dozen mouths twisted into ghastly grins. As the fog thinned, it revealed faces I recognized from the stories my mother had told, those who had come before, those who had fallen victim to the curse that haunted our bloodline. A child with sunken cheeks and lifeless eyes pointed at me, his tiny voice a chilling whisper. "You freed us from the shack, but we remain bound to this place. There is still a price to pay. What do you want from me?" My voice trembled, barely rising above the oppressive silence. The pervasive dread wrapped around my throat, squeezing tightly as I felt naked under their gaze. The figures shifted, flowing like smoke, their faces morphing into agonizing masks of despair. "You will bear the weight of their memories," another voice echoed, soft yet insistent. "But to do this, you must remember the boy." The boy. My heart swung in a pendulum of grief and terror. The boy who hadn't been saved, the boy whose name had been lost to my family's legacy of silence. The instant realization crashed into me like a wave: was he merely a sacrifice honored between past and present, or was he something far more sinister, a harbinger of what was to come? With the question hanging in the air, shadows gathered in a vortex around me, swirling with frenetic energy. I felt a familiar presence inch closer, the despair of countless souls beckoning me, coaxing me towards the edge of reason. "Embrace your lineage," another voice urged, one imbued with a darker resonance, heavy and rich like poison. "Join us in our eternal struggle against the life that forsook us." Involuntarily, I stepped forward, drawn to the depth of their suffering, feeling the power of their shared grief. It wrapped around me like an embrace, the icy tendrils of sorrow luring me towards camaraderie with the outcasts who had once walked the earth. But in that moment of weakness, my heart jolted at a chilling thought: if I accepted this connection, would I become one of them? Would I be forced to dwell in shadows and despair for all eternity? No. I screamed, shaking my head violently. "I will not join you. I will find a way to break this curse." A sudden stillness draped the world as terror rippled through the figures, their sinister smiles fading into grim frowns. The air thickened with palpable rage, and I felt the ground tremble beneath me once more, the rage of pent-up souls igniting the atmosphere. With a forceful push, the darkness closed in again, and the swirling fog described violent patterns around me, a storm of anguished wails and ravenous whispers. "You have chosen denial," they growled in unison. "Now you shall uncover the truth, whether you wish it or not. The boy awaits." With that, the world erupted in blinding light, a scene unfurling around memories far too vivid to dismiss. Stripped of the power of choice, I stood on the precipice of an ancient ritual, a forbidden rite held in the depths of the shack, now reconstructed before me. My heart raced as I recognized the symbols drawn upon the ground, the chanting rising into the air like an unholy melody. And there she was, standing at the center, my mother, but she was not the ethereal figure of my memories. Her eyes were glassy, and a sinister smile curled at the edges of her lips, as if she had become a vessel for the very darkness I sought to escape. "Join us, my love," she beckoned, voice dripping with twisted affection, "and fulfill your destiny." And as I took a step backward, processing the horrifying truth of my legacy, something cold pressed against my spine, a feeling of deep unease. I turned to flee, panic flooding my senses, but stopped dead in my tracks to see the boy. His ghostly form stood at the threshold of the shadows, eyes wide with eternal fear, reaching out to me, mouth moving soundlessly. As I caught his gaze, a surge of recognition set my heart ablaze. "Help me," his silent plea echoed with dire urgency, a desperate cry for deliverance. But the shadows tightened around me, the voices rising in a symphonic chaos. Suddenly, the shack trembled again, and the ground beneath erupted into yawning chasms, sucking in all light and hope. The trap I had escaped from was reanimating, and an insurmountable dread filled my heart as I realized whatever horrors had lain dormant within the shack were now awakening. Then the boy's scream rang out, a gut-wrenching wail that shattered the fabric of reality, cutting through the chaos, introducing a chilling certainty. I had to make a choice, and now, there was no way to escape the haunted legacy or the shadows that had transformed into my undoing. "Do you see him?" My mother's laughter rang like iron nails on flesh. "Your choice has only begun." And just as the ground threatened to swallow me whole, a bone-chilling whisper floated through the air, wrapping around my soul like a chain: "The shack is hungry. And so are you." I stood at the heart of the storm, world unraveling, shadows clawing at my limbs, pulling me deeper into a hell of my own making. The boy's face, smudged by innocence and fear, haunted my every thought, a reminder of the price I would eventually have to pay. "Help me." The plea echoed, oscillating between despair and a desperate hope that we could somehow escape this twisted legacy, yet the shack was a breathing entity now, a predatory beast eager to claim its next victim. With every whisper that echoed through the air, the demands grew more haunting. "Join us. Satisfy their thirst. Surrender your will." I felt the weight of their gazes upon me, the faces of my ancestors morphing into grotesque masks, their mouths twisted into manic grins, their joy stemming from the darkness that fed on our fears. Then my mother's voice emerged, sharp and powerful, piercing through the storm like lightning: "You must choose." I turned towards her apparition, trembling with the heaviness of choices I never asked to make. Her laughter reverberated in my soul, a dire invitation shrouded in shadows. "The only way to break free is to take your true birthright, but it comes with a price. You must sacrifice what you love most, not him. Not the boy." I screamed, horror flooding through my veins. He was my last tether to hope, a reflection of purity untouched by this legacy of despair. "I refuse," but the shack responded, thrashing violently as if battered by invisible hands, drawing shadows close, and in that chaos, the boy disappeared into darkness, his form flickering like a candle about to be snuffed out. "Your love is bound to the darkness," the demon of the shack hissed, a creeping, coiling entity that began to twist around my legs, tightening like a vice. "You will give him to us willingly, or we will take him in anguish. No. I screamed again, pulling at my hair in pure panic as I fought against the grip that threatened to bind me to cycles of past horrors. The cacophony of souls howled as if they were pulling the very fabric of reality apart. "You won't take him. You won't," yet their laughter ricocheted through the shadows, a chilling symphony of dead hopes. The walls of the shack pulsated, threatening to implode into itself, as nightmare shapes grew closer, a maelstrom brewing at the heart of everything I believed. And that laughter ignited something deep within. A dark ember flickered, fueled by every sin etched into my family's history. "If I am to be bound, I will choose my bindings," I bellowed. My heart raced as I reached into that whispering void, into the storm of shadows that demanded a sacrifice. "If you seek a bond, I will make one of my own design." The air grew thick with energy as the shadows surged toward me, coiling like serpents ready to strike, their appetite awakening. We will not be denied. They swirled, wrapping around me like tendrils creeping into my mind, but, behind that storm, I felt the essence of my decision bubbling up from my core, and then burst free like a volcano. You will take what I offer. With a cry that echoed through the chaos, I flung back my head and let out every scream of anger, hurt and despair reverberating through my bloodline until the screams transformed into a fervent chant. I will not cling to their curse, but instead, forge my own legacy. The boy's face flickered back into view, and this time, his eyes filled with recognition and something else, hope. As the storm began to rush toward me, I summoned all the strength I had left, pouring it into the words I spoke with growing conviction. I took the key I had fiercely clutched and pressed it against the earth, summoning the souls of the shack to witness what I was about to do. I offer my blood to break the bonds of fear. Suddenly, the very air around me thickened, coalescing into a violent cyclone, threatening to rip the shack asunder. The shadows shrieked, torn between delight and agony, as tumultuous snarls erupted from within the walls, a beautiful chaos that clashed against the innate darkness of my lineage. Sacrifice? No. The whispers chorused, half in derision, half in horror. Your spirit will be consumed. But I clenched my fists tighter around the key, feeling its power pulsing in rhythm with the beating of my heart. Let them come. I shouted, thrusting my determination into the rising tide. I shall unite those lost, not lose what I hold dear. Your hunger shall not claim him. All around me, the darkness roared, the tiles beneath me vibrating violently. I felt chains that had long bound my family beginning to break as the wounds of long-buried secrets erupted. With everything I had, I directed my energy into the depths of the fissured shack, an explosive effort that felt both terrifying and reviving. The shack trembled beneath me, shadows devouring one another, leaving only remnants of anguished moans echoing through the remnants of their prison. The boy's form flickered at the edge of darkness, and my blood trembled as I reached out towards him, our convergence breaking the curse forged in blood. His eyes held terror, but they also gleamed with something unmistakable, recognition. You saved me. He finally cried, the shadows around him receding like mist beneath a morning sun. With a decisive burst, I felt chains of despair tear away from our souls, the shrouded depths of the shack decorating us in the remnants of lost spirits. Together, we are free. My voice rang out, a sonic resonation that blended with the shattered darkness around me. The cycle unraveled, an atomic explosion imploding within the heart of the shack, tripping the threshold of the horror and sending waves of warmth coursing through the air. With a final, resounding scream, the shack imploded, collapsing in on itself, strands of darkness bursting into light. In the end, I felt my heart mend piece by piece, the agony that had gripped my bloodline dissipating slowly. But the final threads of darkness had wound their way back, whispering promises of chaos, calling me back into the grip of cursed legacies. And in that moment of triumph, lurking just at the edges of my sense of relief was knowledge I could not outrun. In every family, a darkness lies dormant, waiting only for the moment of vulnerability to re-emerge and claim its prize. Now, as I stood under the moonlight, my heart racing with victory and dread alike, I realized that I could never truly escape my legacy. I had escaped the shack, but the darkness would always linger. And somewhere, in the depths of my soul, I understood what even the shadows would never reveal, would always be haunted by the past.